The Tampa Bay Buccaneers had one of the best offenses in the NFL last year, and now they're going to be even better. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs. Credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you every Monday through Friday along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. We are taking a look at where the Bucs stack up against the rest of the NFL. We're going to be talking about some potential draft steals that they got, but we're diving back into the mailbag, and this one comes in from Insider Mike, who said, can you prematurely rank the Buccaneers as a team, as an offense, and as a defense? Where would you rank them overall? So, Mike, this is a great question, and it took a little bit of work, and it's much longer than just a quick answer. So we're really going to dive into this one, and we're going to start on the offensive side of the ball. Last year, the Buccaneers finished as the only playoff team to be top 4 in rushing offense and top 4 in passing offense. Unfortunately, that didn't get them past the first round, but it's a great starting point. So the Buccaneers averaged 29.5 points per game, which was 4th in the NFL. They were 3rd in total offense, so there isn't a whole lot of wiggle room for the Bucs to be able to go up. In fact, it's more likely that they go down in these categories. But that said, let's go ahead and take a deep look. In the 3 games where the Bucs didn't have both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, they averaged 23.3 points per game. That's basically the difference between a touchdown per game for their entire season and then that 3-week stretch. They lost those games by 5, 6, and 3 points. So just hitting their average in points per game over that stretch takes them from 0-3 to 2-1. Now, I didn't include the Ravens game in that because even though Evans went down in the first half, they still had Godwin up until the final minute of the game. But without both, their average dropped significantly. Let's take a look at the run game. Bucky Irving had 1 game with 13 or more carries in the first 9 weeks of the season. Over that span, he averaged 46.5 rushing yards per game. Then, once week 10 rolled around, he had at least 13 carries in every game except week 13 against the Raiders because he left with injury. So outside of that Raiders game, he averaged 100 yards per game. He did not have a game over that span with fewer than 4.3 yards per carry, whereas in the first 9 games, he had 3 games where he averaged less than 4 yards a carry. So let's start trying to piece this thing together. We know that Bucky is going to be the RB1 for the Bucs this season, and he's going to have a lot more opportunities early in the year compared to his rookie season. If you take just his averages from last season, he averaged 12.1 carries per game and finished with 5.4 yards per carry. The carries per game are going to go up. So we're going to say, for the sake of argument, he gets 15 carries a game. The yards per carry, that might go down a little bit. So let's, err on the side of caution here. Let's drop him by a half yard per carry. Let's put him at 4.9 yards. That still works out to 1,249 yards. That's over 100 more rushing yards than last season. That would have made Bucky the 8th leading rusher in the NFL last year instead of the 10th. So we are going to see a boost there. Now let's talk about that touchdown per game that the Bucs were missing during the stretch without Chris and Mike. McMillan came on strong at the end of the season, and when Mike went down against Baltimore, McMillan ended up with 8 targets, but only 3 receptions. Against Atlanta, without both Mike and Chris, he had 7 targets and 4 receptions. Then he missed the games against the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. But down the stretch over the last 5 weeks, 31 targets, 24 receptions, 316 yards, that's 13.2 yards per reception, and 7 touchdowns. 68.5% of his total receiving yards as a rookie came in the final 5 games. He became a legitimate threat for the offense. So once again, his numbers are going to go up. He averaged 4.5 targets per game for the season, but he had 6.2 targets per game over that 5-game stretch. You extrapolate his final 5 weeks into a full season, and he's finishing with 81 receptions for 1,074 yards and 24 touchdowns. Now, obviously, he's not going to get 24 touchdown receptions this year, but those numbers are going to jump. You might be looking at around 55 to 60 receptions, over 700 yards, and then maybe 8 touchdowns, 7 or 8 touchdowns. Regardless, those numbers are going up. Then you factor in the return of Chris Godwin and the arrival of Emeka Egbuka. Godwin was on an all-time pace through 7 games last year, and that pace was 1,399 yards on 121 receptions and 12 touchdowns spread out over a 17-game season. He's probably looking at north of 100 receptions, over 1,000 yards, and double-digit touchdowns this season. Mike is going to be Mike. Lock in 1,000 yards and at least 10 touchdowns. Evans has had double-digit touchdowns 4 out of the last 5 seasons. So you're going to see him in that range again, barring injury, of course. Then you have the addition of Emeka Egbuka, and that is going to do a couple of things. It's going to provide really reliable injury insurance. It's going to spread out defenses to open up the run game or give receivers one-on-one opportunities that they're going to win given the state of the Bucs wide receiver room, and it's going to extend drives. Baker was great on third down last season, but he had 2 players that he consistently went to in those situations. Chris Godwin before the Ravens game and Cade Otton after the Ravens game. Now, Egbuka gives him another third down option that has a proven track record of getting the job done in those situations. He's not going to drop the ball. He's not going to come up short of the sticks. He's going to get exactly where he needs to be, and he's going to extend drives. So now we're talking about the Bucs punting less, maybe not a ton, 1 or 2 times a game. But those drives that were punts last year turn into points this year. Let's say, to be conservative, the Bucs add an extra 5 points per game. Some of those drives that ended in punts last year are going to end in touchdowns this year. Some are going to end in field goals. Some might still end in punts. You might get an extra couple of downs. Baker takes a sack. Now all of a sudden you got to punt again. But let's say it's an extra 5 points per game. That puts the Bucs at 34.5. which would have been the number 1 scoring offense in the league over the Lions, who finished with 33.2. That, to me, is the ceiling of this team. They can absolutely finish as the number 1 scoring offense and top 3 in rushing, passing, and total offense for the 2nd straight year. So if I had to prematurely rank the Bucs offense against the rest of the NFL, I'm going to say 3rd behind the Ravens and the Bills. I think they can be the top offense in the NFC, and there are some good offenses in the NFC, but that's what they've been building towards. Am I going to be surprised if the Lions, Eagles, or Commanders have a better offense? Not at all. But am I going to be surprised if the Bucs offense is better than Baltimore or Buffalo? Not at all. Ever since the arrival of Tom Brady, the Bucs have become an offensive team. Brady immediately made them one of the best offenses in the league, and they haven't backed away from that since. They've been consistently building towards staying among the top offenses in the National Football League. The biggest questions on the offensive side is how much Rachaad White is going to contribute to the run and pass game this season, and whether or not Baker Mayfield is going to protect the football. But what about the defensive side? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Goodbye to sticky notes, scribbled plans on the fridge, and overlapping calendar invites. The Skylight Calendar is here to bring clarity to the chaos and help families stay organized without the stress. The sleek digital display syncs with your existing calendars, Google, Apple, Outlook, and more, making it simple to track appointments, practices, dinners, and reminders all in one easy-to-see place. Me personally, with 2 teenagers playing different sports, plus one with a job, and all the other things that my wife and I have to take care of, we would be lost without our calendar. And the ability for my kids to add their own schedule seamlessly helps us make sure that we're getting there where they need to be, or for them to see that we already have other things planned on a certain day before they start asking to go out and do something with their friends. Right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/NFL. Go to skylightcal.com/NFL for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That's skylightcal.com/NFL. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast. The NFL draft is over, but the roster moves and news never stop. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. So find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, so we broke down the offensive side of the ball, and I feel like the Bucs are going to be at least where they were last year, maybe probably even better. But the defense was very obviously a problem last year, and the Bucs have made some moves to improve it. So the Bucs finished 18th in total defense, 29th in passing defense, 4th in rushing defense, and 16th in scoring defense. Even just a field goal per game less given up by the Buccaneers moves them from 16th to 6th. That's how close these things can be. So where are they going to be this season? Let's start with the additions of Hassan Reddick, David Walker, and Elijah Roberts. These 3 guys were brought in to get after the quarterback. We know Reddick can, and if he can jump into that 8 to 10 sack range, the Bucs are going to be sitting pretty. Before last season, when Reddick had all of his issues with the Jets that were caused by the Jets, he had double-digit sacks in 4 straight seasons. And I'm not even asking for him to go out and get double digits. Get 8. Get 8 sacks, and that is going to open things up for Yaya Diaby to get 6 or 7. Now your starting edge rushers have exploded compared to their production last year. Then you hope that Jason is right and Braswell takes a big step forward. You have Walker and Nelson as rotational pieces, and the pass rush is looking much, much better. That is obviously going to affect the passing defense. So, when you take a look at Roberts joining the defensive line rotation, plus Kalijah Kancey, plus all the additions at edge rusher, you are looking much better than you were this time last year. But now you take a look at the upgrades in the secondary. You have Tyke Smith moving back to safety where he can be Antoine Winfield Jr.'s partner. Winfield, you have coming back healthy, which is not a state that he was in last year. You have Zion McCollum entering his second season as a starter, and I expect another step forward from him because he's taken a step forward in his production and his progress each and every year he's been in the league. Then you have the competitions going on, and that's where it starts to get really interesting. You have Benjamin Morrison and Jamel Dean. You have Jacob Parrish and Christian Isian. And look, I love that. I absolutely love the competitions that they're going to have in training camp. As I've said on this podcast a billion times, iron sharpens iron. Competition breeds excellence. Those players are going to have to earn their jobs. Nothing is getting handed out to these players. So whoever the starter is at the beginning of the season will have had to work their butts off to be out there. That, of course, doesn't mean that the starters won't change. Performance is going to impact that. Injuries are going to impact that. And we know that Dean is going down at some point. We know that no matter who the starting slot corner is, there's coverage there. and at safety if someone goes down. That's one of the biggest things that I believe is going to make a difference in this defense in 2025. Their depth is much stronger than it was last year. Now, I'm not saying that performance won't drop in case of injury. It probably will, but it's not going to drop to the point that they're having to sign Ryan Neal off the street. They're much better equipped to handle those kinds of problems this year compared to where they were last year. The run defense is still going to be very solid. It always is. It started off shaky last season, but they got it together and finished as a top 5 run defensive unit as they do each and every year. So as far as where I see them lining up against the rest of the NFL, I'm going to say this. I am very cautiously optimistic about what this defense is capable of. I believe they upgraded the roster on the defense. I believe they brought in impact players that can do their jobs and get the defense closer to what Todd Bowles wants. Of course, what Todd Bowles wants is for this defense to be like the 2020 defense, where they were just maulers up and down all 3 levels. I think this defense has the chance to look closer to that defense, the 2020 defense, than the one we saw in 2024. But I'm also not sitting here saying that I'm ready to crown them as a completely changed unit. I said I'm cautiously optimistic, and that's because I believe that they can get it figured out and that they have a ton of talent on that side of the ball. But until they show me that they have figured it out and that they can actually live up to their talent, I'm going to say they wind up in the middle of the pack again. Passing defense, I'm going to go ahead and bump them to 24th right now. That's the difference, last year of about 20 yards per game. That's not a huge change, but it's a slight improvement. Rushing defense, I'm going to leave it alone. Top 5. That's probably where they end up. I'm completely fine with that. You're completely fine with that. Scoring, I'm going to say that the improvements that they made is going to shave off an average of 2 points per game. So that means the Bucs defense would allow 20.6 points per game. And last year, that would have put them 9th. So now we're talking about the potential of a top 10 scoring defense. And when you take a look at the separation, it's really not much. The difference between the Bucs finishing as the 16th scoring defense last year and the Chargers, who were first, was 4.9 points per game. It's going to be about whether or not the Bucs can actually get off the field on third downs this year, or getting off the field on a third down. That's the difference between a touchdown and a field goal. So looking at the NFL overall, where do I place the Bucs? If I have them as a top 3 offense, we'll say if you average out passing, rushing, total, and scoring, they'll be about 12th in defense. What about them overall? Here's what I'm going to say. The Bucs have every chance to be one of the top teams in the NFL. You have the Eagles as the defending champs. They're the top of the list. To be the man, you got to beat the man. The Eagles are number 1. After that, in no particular order, you have the Ravens, you have the Bills, you have the Lions, and then who? I would say the Bucs are in tier 2. Tier 1 are the 4 teams that I just named. The Eagles, the Lions, the Ravens, the Bills. Tier 2, you have, again, in no particular order, the Bucs, the Chiefs, the Commanders, the Packers, maybe the Bengals. If Al Golden gets that defense turned around, even if he just gets them to the middle of the pack, which is where the Bucs were last year, their offense is so good that all of a sudden they're one of the upper teams in the AFC. But that's where the Bucs fall in line, in my opinion. And let me say this. Any of those tier 2 teams could absolutely jump into tier 1. These are all playoff teams. I'm simply saying that if I'm predicting the conference championship games right now in May, those are my final 4. The Eagles, the Lions, the Ravens, the Bills. But no one is going to bat an eye if any of my tier 2 teams are being talked about nationally in the Super Bowl conversation. That's just kind of the tier break for me. And then the tier break to tier 3 is a much wider gap. That's where all of the uncertainty falls in. Who's coming out of the NFC West? Who's going to emerge out of the NFC South or the NFC North? that aren't the Bucs or the Packers? Are the Bears actually going to be for real? Are the Vikings going to take a big step back because of the quarterback situation? Those are all the unanswered questions. But to me, the Bucs are right there, right underneath the top 4 teams. You could put them 5th, you could put them 8th. To me, it's pretty much the same because those 2 tiers are so close together. And the teams in tier 1 and the teams in tier 2 can be interchangeable once the season gets started. Did the Buccaneers pull off a couple of draft steals? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments like Tyrese Halliburton against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Right now, the second round of the playoffs are absolutely off the rails. The road teams have won the first 5 games, but the Oklahoma City Thunder are still the favorites to win the finals at plus 160, followed by the defending champion Boston Celtics at plus 190. The Cleveland Cavaliers, who are now down 2 games to none, they're at plus 1,000, and then the Minnesota Timberwolves at plus 1,200. New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you're going to get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Wrapping things up here on a Wednesday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. We have more buzz following the NFL draft and ahead of rookie minicamp. We're going to talk about rookie minicamp with Evan Klosky on tomorrow's episode, but there are a few draft analysts that have pegged the Buccaneers as getting 2 of the biggest steals in the draft. Let's start with ESPN's Louis Riddick, who dropped a list of the most underrated players in the draft. Let me say, I like how Riddick does this. Instead of just listing his favorite players that were taken after the second round, which was his criteria, he considers the underrated players drafted to be 3rd round or later. But, he doesn't just go through and name, his favorite players that got taken late. He names one player from every team. For the Bucs, it was edge rusher David Walker, who was picked in the 4th round. Walker, as I've talked about on this show a few times, was an absolute monster for Central Arkansas. He was the top-rated edge rusher from PFF for the 2024 season, and he was easily the most dominant player in all of FCS. The big question is going to be whether or not his game translates to the NFL, considering the competition he went up against. Now, he was great at the Senior Bowl, which was a jump as far as competition and talent were concerned, but it's going to be an even bigger jump from the Senior Bowl to the NFL. The other one that I want to talk about here comes from Jeremy Fowler of ESPN, who wrote that Buccaneers 3rd round pick Jacob Parrish might be one of the biggest steals of the class. Fowler said, quote, 3rd round corner Jacob Parrish can be considered a winning pick for Tampa. I talked to a few teams pre-draft that listed him as a sleeper for the end of the 1st or early 2nd, though some obviously thought that was too rich, end quote. Fowler went on to quote an NFC executive who said, quote, his size is an issue, but nickels are more prevalent and his ceiling is high due to speed and traits, end quote. And finally, real quick, Fowler did confirm something that I was suspicious of. Some of you were probably suspicious of, and I did mention it on the mailbag episode, and I mentioned it last week as well, but it was, quote, the Bucs indeed did love Alabama linebacker Jahad Campbell, but like other teams, the overall medical profile was a bit of a concern, end quote. Back to Parrish, though, because that's who I want to talk about. Jahad Campbell's on the Eagles. Jacob Parrish is on the Bucs. The fact that some teams had him listed as a end of the 1st or early 2nd round sleeper speaks volumes about his talent. Obviously, some teams were a little concerned about the size, and that led to him falling. But the Bucs got a player in the third that other teams were incredibly high on. The Bucs believe that he can perform at an elite level despite being just 5'9", and that his speed, his IQ, and his natural ability are going to make him a weapon for the offense or for the defense. This goes back to what I was just talking about with the improvements on the defense. Parrish doesn't have to start immediately to make an impact for this team, but Bowles and Light wanted to upgrade the depth, which was flat out non-existent last year. That caused the Bucs to lose some games that they probably shouldn't have. Now you have a situation where you could have Izien as the starter and Parrish backing him up, but then if something happens to the safeties, you can slide Izien back to the safety position. Parrish is a plug-and-play rookie at slot corner. You could also see Parrish beat Izien outright for the job in training camp. At the very least, you're going to have Parrish as a gunner on special teams if he starts the season backing up Izien, and that speed is going to be a huge boost to the coverage team. So even as a backup nickel, he's still going to have impacts on the games to some degree. This could play out to be back-to-back seasons where the Buccaneers selections in the third and fourth rounds end up playing huge roles for the team in their rookie years. Last year, it was Tyke Smith, Jalen McMillan, Bucky Irving. This year, you have Jacob Parrish and David Walker. Last year, all three of those guys started in a rotational role before really coming on strong down the stretch and helping to propel the Bucs into the postseason, playing vital roles on both sides of the ball. Do not be surprised if the same thing happens again this season, except the difference is these guys will only have an impact on the defensive side of the ball because the Bucs didn't take an offensive player in the third or fourth round. We know that Walker isn't going to start over Reddick or Diaby. And while there's a chance that Parrish starts, it's more likely that Izien gets the nod to start the season. But as the season evolves, these guys start to understand their roles a little bit better, start to understand the speed of the game a little bit better. They are very likely going to be players that we point to in November and December as impact guys that are helping the Bucs make their sixth consecutive postseason run. The only two players that the Bucs drafted, in my opinion, that have a chance to crack the week one starting lineup are the guys taken on day two, Parrish and Benjamin Morrison. Other than that, it was all depth and rotational guys that are going to, still have more than a few opportunities to be on the field, especially Emeka Egbuka. But you have to remember that health always plays a factor. 2020 was an outlier where the Bucs really stayed pretty healthy all year long. But when they weren't healthy, they had the depth to make up for it. Go back and remember. We all remember playoff Lenny. He was Ronald Jones' backup. He wasn't the starting dude. So when Rojo went down, Lenny stepped up and had an all-time playoff run. I would say that this year's team is as close to that 2020 team as we have seen since 2020 in terms of having that reliable starting caliber depth to help overcome whatever happens. So again, we have to wait and see all this get played out. We have to see, who wins these training camp battles. But if I'm a Buccaneers fan right now, taking a look at what they did in the draft, what they did in free agency, what their roster was already like in 2024, and looking into the 2025 season, I'm real happy with the talent and the depth that they've been able to add to a roster last year that was already elite on the offensive side, and just a couple of pieces and some bad injury luck away from being much better than how they performed on defense. That's going to do it for this episode. Evan Klosky joins me tomorrow as we talk about rookie minicamp and some names to keep an eye on from the undrafted ranks. But until then, please check out everything going on over on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. And become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.